Great, well, thank you very much. And after that very serious session on public relations, we're going to offer a bit of light relief now by talking about social change and how to change the world and build a better place. No, it was a great conversation. And to have this conversation, we have Randi Zuckerberg, who's oddly didn't appear as much in The Social Network as I would have hoped, either as yourself or as a character with your name.
After Angelina Jolie declined, no one else could, could do it. I'm just kidding.
And Chris, you sort of had a walk-on part, maybe, as someone.
Fortunately, a minor role, yeah.
Indeed.
I skated by.
But so our set text today is from the great prophet Malcolm Gladwell. In the New Yorker last October, he wrote, "The instruments of social media are well suited to making the existing social order more efficient. They are not a natural enemy of the status quo. If you are of the opinion that all the world needs is a little buffing around the edges, this should not trouble you." That view is beginning to, get quite a lot of currency. There's people like Evgeny Morozov, who's written books saying that in fact, the social media is not this radical revolutionary force that we thought it would be, but may actually be more used by the powers that be to censor, to control, and so forth. And I really wanted to get a perspective from two people who are in different ways have probably know more about how social media is being used to try and change the world in revolutionary ways than anyone. And we've had a very useful real-world example that I'm going to start by asking Randi about, which is the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia, which has variously been called the WikiLeaks revolution or the Facebook revolution because of the way that information that was distributed and networks that were formed through WikiLeaks, Twitter, Facebook had an effect. And I wanted to get your perspective, Randi, on what actually happened. And do you think Facebook can claim some of the responsibility?
There was actually a fantastic article that came out this morning that I would encourage everyone to read in The Atlantic. It was an interview with our head of security, Joe Sullivan, and it was talking about some of the really unique challenges that we saw with the situation in Tunisia. All of a sudden, it's very easy with the United States and Europe to track things that are going on with IP addresses because you can tell when multiple IP addresses are logging into the same Facebook account. But all of a sudden, we have a situation in Tunisia where we're getting reports that political bloggers' accounts are being hacked, and it was very difficult to see what was actually going on. We've dealt with situations where ISPs have blocked Facebook before, but we've never actually dealt with a situation where ISPs were actually trying to collect information as people were logging into Facebook. So the security team quickly rallied around. We implemented a number of very quick solutions where you were asked to identify your friends in photographs on Facebook in order to get through a more secure login, and trying a few things like that. So that was on the security fringe. We also saw a lot of people turning to Facebook as a place to upload video because all other sites were blocked where people could upload videos and really real-time information from political pages.
So I think one of the points that was made in that article was that it was, in the end, regarded as a technical decision by Facebook to stop a hack, like you would stop any hack, rather than a kind of mission in a broader sense. And I just wondered do you regard it as part of your mission of empowering a community to actually empower them politically and to be a democratic enabling organization?
I think that's a really interesting debate. I know in this case it was a matter of protecting people's passwords and login information. It wasn't a political issue in this case, but it definitely does raise the point if there should be special consideration given to activists and NGOs on the platform.
And what sort of way might that be done if you were going to do that?
Possibly through either quicker response through our customer service queues or our security queues.
But when you say you have a debate internally, is there a sense that some people in Facebook would like to see you as a crusading organization trying to promote democracy around the world?
There's always people who have different views. I think right now, the view of the security team really is just to protect, with hundreds of millions of people, protecting people's confidential information is key. And it doesn't matter if it's a political issue or what it is, but I do think that we're exploring ways in order to maybe give priority in different situations.
I mean, one way in which, and I'm going to come to you in a moment, Chris, but one way in which Facebook is experimenting is to look at providing information about missing children in America, which is sort of starting to create a formal public space. Can you just talk a bit about what your thinking is in doing that?
So we actually just released, for the first time, you can get Amber Alerts for missing children through Facebook. You can actually sign up in your particular state that you live in the United States and get Amber Alerts pushed to you through Newsfeed. This was actually a really big deal that we did this because Facebook is a neutral platform. We've never taken a stance on a cause, but we really felt that this was a cause that was really important and an important vehicle of information. So we've talked about kind of global disasters and getting the word out. If this works, this could be a really good means in order to get information out quickly to a large group of people.
Now, Chris, you have credited in many ways with President Obama's election through some of your work in the campaigning phase using social media. But since he's been in office, there's been a real sort of dissatisfaction with his communicating with that same base. And I wonder whether, as some people have suggested, social media is helpful in sometimes in getting people elected, but hasn't yet been used as an effective way of governing. Do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, I think that the answer to this question also tracks back to sort of the way that you initially framed the conversation around Gladwell's piece. Social media is just a component of how people live. It's an important component that is changing the way that we communicate, but it is not a panacea for world peace. It is not on its own going to necessarily bring democracies to worlds where there's totalitarian or authoritarian regimes. It can make it easier for people to speak and communicate, and that's part of what makes up democracy. But social media is a fundamental way of communicating that changes things structurally, but isn't magic in a box. It's not a magic pill. And so the same thing goes in the context of the Obama campaign and what's currently going on with the Obama administration. 2007, 2008 was a really unique time in American history where people were incredibly frustrated with the status quo and were ready and willing to build a movement to change the way politics was done. They used social media in large part to do so. Social media at the same time, though, is playing a very different role now in politics because there is a great deal more frustration with the deficit, with the style of governing in D.C. and what has continued to be a really highly partisan environment. So I think that the challenge for the administration now is to think about not only how they're going to use social media in gearing up for the re-election campaign in 2012, but also what the really clear, poignant, timely message of Obama himself and the campaign as a whole is going to be, because you have to have both for social media to actually be able to have the impact that Obama supporters would like it to have.
Do you personally feel disappointed by how the Obama team have used social media since they've been in office?
So it's really important to make a differentiation between what the administration has done, which I think by and large has been fantastic. They have, whether it's with social media or opening new data sets, creating new platforms to track the stimulus package, the economic recovery, there's a whole host of conversations that they've enabled to happen in a way that's never happened before in the history of American politics, and I give them a lot of credit for doing so. I do think that the community of activists that was powering the campaign, that 13 million people that we ended up with in November 2008, has been disappointed that the technology they use hasn't enabled them to continue to self-organize for their priorities in a way that means that they're meaningfully heard. That's not actually technology that's controlled by the administration itself. It's part of a separate organization which is now being considered for the re-elect. But I think it's important to make a differentiation between those two things. On the whole, I give the administration itself and Macon Phillips, who directs new media there, an A. They've done really great work.
Now, some people would say that, in fact, the Tea Party movement on the right in America is now using social media better. Do you think there's any truth to that?
So what I think is really interesting about the way that the Tea Party is using social media is that it's highly decentralized. You know, our campaign was relatively decentralized as a campaign, but there was still a central network. There was still my.barackobama.com. There was still a Facebook page. There was still, at that time when MySpace was still a really key way for people to communicate, there was that central location. With the Tea Party now, there isn't that same centralization. There are a few platforms and there are a few networks, but I think that it has been able to grow as quickly as it has and be a really genuine bottoms-up movement led by some very big top-down names like, you know, Bill O'Reilly, Sarah Palin, and the whole group. But because social media exists. But it is a different usage of social media than we had in 07, 08 on the initial Obama campaign.
Although it has been very interesting to see Sarah Palin turning to Facebook as a place to break news. That's something that we really haven't seen politicians doing very much of, and she really uses her Facebook page in that way.
Yeah, which is good and bad. I mean, I think it's great because it means that she can sort of get to people unfiltered through the media, but I do think that, you know, whether it's the traditional media or even blogs, there's an important sort of role that they play in asking her hard questions like Katie Couric did in 2008. So I think that, you know, her usage of social media is really groundbreaking in a lot of ways, and I give her a lot of credit for it. But I do think it raises structural questions about how we make sure our candidates are vetted.
And there's a broader question in the sense that, you know, what's being called sort of my TV or, you know, my newspaper. That everyone now is able to use social media to isolate themselves in a bubble where they only get the facts and opinions that they want. And I mean, do you worry, either of you, that social media may undermine democratic conversation in that way?
Sure. I mean, I want to agree with Chris here. I think that we're in a time when expert media is more critical than ever because there is so much information out there and you're getting it in such real time from your friends. I think luckily one of the trends that we're seeing is that people are more and more turning to, maybe they're discovering the news from their friends, but then they're turning to the experts in order to get a real rundown of what's happened.
Yeah, I think there's a real role to play to make sure that people listen to both sides. You know, I think that, you know, being on the left in American politics, very few, if any, of my friends have ever watched Glenn Beck, you know, who has an incredible reach. I mean, they'll read the stories in the New York Review of Books about Glenn Beck's reach, but they won't actually watch his programs. And I think that that's really concerning. So I think that is a structural downside. I think it is outweighed by by the opportunity that social media offers for people to speak much more broadly, for everyone to have a voice in a way that wasn't possible before. So on the whole, I still think it's very a step forward. But I think that there are upsides and downsides, of course.
Now, one of the things that Google has done quite well has been to start to use the data that it has to identify social trends. I mean, one of the things that it was very quick to do was to find that it could identify future outbreaks of flu quicker than the World Health Organization, the traditional early warning systems. And they've now got a whole body of people looking for other early warning signs. Are you looking at that within Facebook with all the information that you must have circulating amongst your community?
Yeah, we had a great conversation about this last night in terms of how could you use tools like Facebook to predict a natural disaster, an outbreak, how people are writing things in their status. We haven't done that yet, but one of the things we are tracking, we are actually working with Stanford right now on a peace initiative, basically looking at Facebook friending data to see how you can quantify world peace. We're looking at unlikely friendships that are happening in the world, like Israel and Palestine. How many people become Facebook friends in those regions every day? Or India, Pakistan, Greece, Turkey, just regions that are very unlikely, and tracking that in comparison with activity that's going on in those regions of the world. So we are taking a look at data, but one of the challenges that we also talked about yesterday is that not everyone on Facebook sets their data to default everyone public. And we only have a practice of using data in that way that's set to everyone.
Now, one of the things I've written about in my book, Philanthrocapitalism, is the extent to which the whole world of non-profits and of doing good is incredibly untransparent and disconnected and atomized, and that really gets in the way of doing a lot of things that could be done. Now, Chris, your new organization is an attempt to address that. Can you just briefly say what you're trying to do?
Sure. So we've tried to level the playing field so that it's easy for any nonprofit or NGO or any cause that's out there to have a social and dynamic web presence within 5 minutes for free. It's called Jumo. It's a network for people to find these organizations, follow them, support them. But the spirit behind it is that you've got literally millions of organizations working on some part of the global change puzzle all across the globe, and yet a lot of them still are not heard, despite all of the advancements that we've seen with social media. So we sort of view it as our role to build a central network that helps people find those organizations more easily and helps those organizations tell their stories much easier than it is for them to do so now.
We were talking also yesterday, Randy, about how, in a sense, there's a lot of disappointment with Facebook causes. I guess Sean isn't here, but so we can say that. And the sense that it was initially seen as a way that it's going to raise a lot of money for non-profits, and actually a lot of them have gone on and not found that they've raised much money. What's been learned through the experience of causes about how to use it and what works and what doesn't?
Sure. I think a lot of nonprofits maybe had unrealistic expectations for the causes application. They thought, we're going to stick this little box on our profile and we're going to raise millions of dollars, and then it didn't happen, and they felt disappointed. I also think that we've seen a shift in how nonprofits view social media. I mean, they really saw people either volunteer their time or donate money were the two ways to be involved. And what we've seen is that there's dozens of steps in between. I think that's something that Chris is capturing very well with Jumo, but they really underestimated the value, for example, of someone updating their status or liking their page or sending out a tweet and what that means to really recommend that cause to their friends. And I think that they're starting to track more of the value of engagement than they are of just a one-time donation.
There was a lot of conversation, I guess, that started around the Iran protests, where the State Department reportedly stopped Twitter or asked Twitter not to upgrade their programs for a few days so that they could keep the movement going. I mean, are you finding that government is now, working quite hard to figure out how to use social media, work with these organizations in order to, let's say you had another Hurricane Katrina that was to do something in New Orleans, would we see FEMA and the emergency forces using social media to work much better, or is not much happening on that front?
I think this is another place where you see a lot of change since this administration has come in. I mean, every single department on down feels like it has not only the faith and backing, but the responsibility to think through how to use social media in their programs. A lot of that is because Obama installed a CTO and a CIO at the highest levels of government, but it's also because there's a sense that government is not working in a lot of ways, whether it's the Katrina response or so many of the other examples in America in 2011. And I think in that environment, people are looking for other solutions. And I worry that social media, it seems that structurally, there's often the first expectation that it's going to work magic, and then people get a little disappointed. Then eventually they sort of meet in the middle, where they understand that it provides value and enables people to have conversations that wasn't possible previously. But that doesn't mean you don't necessarily have to pay attention to something like disaster response and continue to really invest in it.
I think we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. And does anyone want to kick us off?
We can just dance.
Okay, well, that's great. So the other thing I thought was quite... we got someone in the middle there. Has this got a microphone? If you just say who you are as well.
Hi, I'm Axel Schmiegelo, and I'm from Sevenload. I just want to pick up on the last question around causes and how you can promote them in social media. There's a platform in Germany called betterplace.org, not to be confused with the American Better Place, where people contribute projects, and there are many ways of being involved. Not only sort of endorse a project or give money, but there are different roles you can take. Do you think you could expand one day in that direction, where you can interact with the Facebook page of a cause and have many different roles, like supporter, or I'd be willing to go there, or I'd be willing to contribute my time, or I know someone? Those are the kinds of roles that exist in such platforms.
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, especially now that we have such robust tools where you can actually log into Facebook on an external site. I don't see why you couldn't build something like that now, but I think that's a great idea.
I mean, I know that Kiva, the microfinance lending website, is very much looking at how they start to move beyond peer-to-peer lending to actually being an activist site where the community starts to be alerted when there's legislation going through in a particular country around aid or something of that kind. And I think a number of different communities are trying to actively evolve in that way to go beyond just fundraising. Well, I just wanted to, Chris, you were going to say something.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's really interesting is that social media is one piece of this puzzle. All of us are, very excited about social media, but really traditional more traditional platforms like email, or even more recently, mobile and SMS. These are the frontiers of a lot of innovation, just as social media is, whether it's how it's being used on the ground and in emergency situations. I was talking with someone from Refugees United who works on mobile usage in places like Sudan, which is having this election, to Avaz, which has a 7 million email list, which is actually really quite powerful on the other side of the spectrum. So there's a whole suite of technologies that can make a difference here.
And unfortunately, our time is already up, but let's just take one more question and then...
My name is Richard Gutjahr. I'm a blogger and journalist. Randi, this is for you. You just said that Facebook doesn't take a stand and tries to stay neutral. Is that also true, like when the government asks you for user data, such as we've just seen with Twitter and the Department of Justice?
I mean, we've never done anything like that with working with governments to hand over data. And actually, I was just remembering something that you were asking me before about kind of preferential treatment for activists and what that means. One big thing that we see now, a lot of activists don't want to use their real name when they log onto Facebook. And that's a huge debate for us because our mission is real identity. So to this date, we have not allowed, we shut down profiles where people are impersonating or logging on as someone else, but then you get these situations where people can be killed for writing things. So I think that that's a debate that's kind of on the forefront also. But
and you were also saying that you were deleting data very quickly in Tunisia because you didn't want to...
In Iran.
In Iran, okay.
With Iran, we weren't even storing data at all. We were deleting it as fast as we could, really, so that there wasn't even an issue of being able to send anything over. Right, just very briefly, do you tweet? Do you have a Twitter handle, both of you? Chris,
yes. Yes, I do.
And what is it? It's Chris Hughes, is it?
Mine's Chris Hughes, yes, sorry, yeah.
I feel compelled to mention my public Facebook page first, facebook.com/Randi, but you can also find me at Randi Zuckerberg on Twitter.
And I am Matt Bish, M-A-T-T-B-I-S-H, and I'd like to thank the panelists. I think we've got so much more to talk about here, but unfortunately our 25 minutes is up, so grab any of us afterwards and we can carry this conversation on. I'm just very... to get back to Gladwell's comments, I do think he's fundamentally wrong, that there's something about this media that is empowering overall, but that it's going to still need to evolve quite a lot further. There's all sorts of trends like the head of Ushahidi going to Google and all sorts of other trends that are quite exciting to watch over the next few years. So thank you very much, both Chris and Randi.
Thank you.